forgiveness is very pure because it's so hard for us to do, because it really means going in the opposite direction rather than holding on. It means actually voluntarily letting go, which can be very difficult. But something happens when we forgive others or when we forgive ourselves. Something shifts in the interconnectedness between all of us.
So why did I start this podcast? After experiencing miscarriages and going through a challenging period of numbness and anger, I found healing by understanding my emotions, reconnecting with my body, and connecting with my soul, and also my spirit babies. My mission with this podcast is to enter a space of vulnerability and sacredness, of deeply personal stories of women who were impacted by pregnancy loss, miscarriages, stillbirth, and infertility. My goal is to bridge the gap between our losses and the deep spiritual insights that can come with them so that they can guide us toward healing and understanding beyond the physical realm. I'm Daisy May Reyes, and I bring together the wisdom of our wombs as a collective. Welcome to the Women Collective podcast, presented by the Oversoul Vibration. Does the power of forgiveness truly hold the key in changing people's lives? Well, this is what our guest, Barbara J. Hunt, an author and transformational coach, believes it has the power to potentially change lives. And when I chatted with Barbara, I was quickly impressed by how much she already knows, and she truly cares about helping people through the challenges of forgiveness, particularly in the context of pregnancy loss, infertility, and infant loss. So throughout our conversation, Barbara unpacked the three key components of forgiveness, which you'll learn today on the show. She also shed some light on the often overlooked obstacles of unconscious blaming and how this can hinder our ability to truly heal and move forward. So, what does it truly mean to forgive? And how can we unlock the secrets of forgiveness to create more peace, understanding, and connection in our lives? So stay tuned to find out. How does the aspect of your work can help our audience who are listening, who are experiencing or have experienced pregnancy loss, infertility, or infant loss?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm primarily interested in anything that helps us with our life journeys. With being a human being is difficult, and there are challenging things that happen, and obviously, pregnancy loss or child loss can be one of the most devastating things that happen. And forgiveness can be relevant to all of our different relationships, including with ourselves. And often there's three parts, really, when you're thinking about what needs to be forgiven. Sometimes we might not think we need to forgive somebody when there's been a loss, but it may well be that there's an unconscious blaming that goes on. So that's something that's really important to be aware of. And in my fascination with forgiveness, which has been over like 3 decades, I've been really curious about how we apply this particular practice to our lives. And I've worked with people who are in grief circles, and there often is a part where sometimes we find it hard to forgive ourselves because of the grief that we're experiencing. Sometimes holding back that forgiveness feels like also holding back the grief. And it's often not discussed. We don't always talk about forgiveness in that way. And as I said, in some circumstances, there's 3 different kinds of forgiveness. There's forgiveness of the thing that happened, the circumstances that may be beyond someone's control. There may be people who are implicated. There may be something that has happened that was a mistake or that it was regrettable. And then there can be, so that might involve forgiving another person. It could be us needing to be forgiven. So there may be an element where we feel like we need to ask for forgiveness or somehow be forgiven. And then there's also self-forgiveness. So it can be quite complex, and those things can show up in the same, those same experiences in the same event. And that's why it's so helpful to have a way of processing, if you like, through the difficult emotions that helps us to just meet the reality the way it is without the judgments and without the recriminations and without the self hatred or the self shutdown.
Thank you, Barbara, for breaking it down. That it's amazing that there are three components of forgiveness. And I would like to know, why is it hard for women like us in that space to practice forgiveness?
Well, it can be very individual, so I can't speak to like specific, oh, it's definitely this, but there's a few possibilities. And like I said, one of them is that we don't really know how to grieve. And, it depends on our culture and what kind of support we have around us. But sometimes the like holding on, like not forgiving, it can be like holding resentment against yourself, can feel somehow more tolerable than just purely feeling the grief. And I think that can be one of the biggest obstacles, is that's an unconscious thing that's happening. And because we're not aware of it, we can't do anything about it. And of course, with the journey of forgiveness, when something difficult happens, there's often a time lapse between when something happens and when you feel ready to forgive. And I use a very specific definition of forgiveness that I learned in one of my original trainings about forgiveness, which was from Cade Bradford Brown. He was one of my first teachers. And he said that forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone, including yourself, for what you did or what they did or didn't do. And that can include that someone can be yourself. And I'll say it again because it's quite long. It's the absolute refusal to hold ill will. So that can be a grudge, a gripe, grievance, resentment, judgment, any of those negative kind of feelings towards somebody, including yourself, for what they did or didn't do. And I really like the definition because it means that it's applicable to the things that happen, but also the things that don't happen. We might need to forgive ourselves for things that we've failed to do or things that we haven't done. And I like it because if you imagine you're gathering up resentments, and these can be against yourself, judgments and unkindnesses, and we kind of gather them up like a score. We have an internal score, and we hold it against ourselves. And we even have that phrase about holding something against yourself, and that's like you're holding it. And the absolute refusal is like this, where you actually really consciously choosing to let it go, to put it down. And that can be very hard when it's about holding on to ill will against yourself, a judgment against yourself, something that you want to put down. You can choose to let go of it. And that doesn't mean that it's easy, but it just means it's something to work towards, that you can hold a very challenging situation like a miscarriage or the loss of a child and not have the judgments and the blame and all the negative feelings. Of course there's grief, but if you have on top of the grief all of the negative feelings as well, the blame and the judgment, that if you can separate those out, you're left with a much more pure experience and something that you can then grieve and assimilate into your life.
Yes, I totally agree with that. As far as they are going on top of each other, and
Yes.
by identifying them individually and separating them, the process can be much easier for those that are grieving. And
Yes.
speaking of process, the process of forgiveness, I think so many people find it so complicated when it's really not. And I feel that it's just like you mentioned, it's because there is a conscious choice of that refusal to let go of the origin of where that resentment or the blame is coming from. In your work, what have you found that help people just to uncomplicate it? I guess, to simply say it.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things. So in my book, I've outlined the 5 obstacles to forgiveness and these universal obstacles. So in some ways, it's a bit like you're jumping over each one of those hurdles, you can get towards realizing that there's something beyond that, but it helps to be able to, it's a bit like untangling something. If you can untangle those first 5 obstacles, then when you actually get to the part when you feel ready to do some forgiveness work, because there's a journey towards forgiveness, and then there's also what I teach in my book, which is a little process, like a little ritual, a way of undoing what you've been holding on to. And there's real power. Ritual is really important. That, when we marry, or when there's a birthday, or like different holidays, and there are certain ways that we celebrate things and ways that we mourn things, and there's something very powerful about having a way of doing your forgiveness work. So although you said it's straightforward, because ultimately it's a choice to let go of your ill will or your judgments, that doesn't mean that it's easy, even though it's simple. So simple is not the same as easy. And so a lot of my work helps people get to the point where they're ready to do that little internal ritual. And you do it with your eyes closed in what's called an active imagination, like a Jungian kind of way of doing the process. And what's wonderful about that is it means that there are no limits, because it's your imagination. So if you've lost a baby, you can talk to the baby's soul, or you can talk to the baby. There are ways of actually addressing the things that feel like they can't be closed, that want to close. You want to be able to have a conversation. You want sometimes reassurance. I've worked with many women who've had this experience, and to be able to hear from the baby, I'm okay, or I didn't need, to have the whole experience. I just wanted to dip my toes in. And there's something about having that reassuring, imaginative process that can be very, very healing. And even with women who've chosen terminations, that the same can be incredibly powerful, because in my work with women, with everybody, all kinds of people. But if that has been part of your history, even though you may have made that choice for all the right reasons for you at the time, it's still a significant enough event for so somehow choosing to do a healing process on that, however many years later, can be incredibly powerful and can help to heal something that feels like it's been incomplete in the past.
And thank you for to really differentiating what simple and easy really is, because it's
Mm.
true. Even when it's explained so simple, the task is not easy to do. And so, with that said, where can our audience who are listening, who are needing to practice forgiveness in any form, how can they learn about that from your work?
Well, the best thing really is the book, because it's comprehensive, and I really consciously wrote it in a way that made it simple and hopefully accessible for everybody. Even though, again, it's simple, it's there's a lot to it. And in fact, I had feedback from somebody today who just said, "Wow, I had to stop reading and then just really think about what you'd said." Because there's layers of self-awareness really that I'm taking the reader through. And then also I do host online group, I call them forgiveness fields. So it's a bit like a practice place, because in what I'm my teaching and my own practice is that there are things to forgive all the time, not just these big life events, these big challenging things that happen, but always there's things that need to be forgiven. And a bit like we don't say, oh, I've taken the rubbish out, or I've been to a yoga class, I've done yoga. You've not done yoga. If you've done a practice of yoga, and it's an ongoing thing. And I think our personal and spiritual and our healing work is ongoing. And you assimilate things and you digest them. And then, you need to eat again, like all of life is rinse and repeat. And so the forgiveness fields are places where you can come and practice. And it's just we do a little bit of prep, and then I guide everybody through my 7-step forgiveness process. And you can do things like, annoying neighbors, or, a sibling or a kid, or, like somebody in your life who you feel like you actually know they're really getting under my skin. I want to do a little practice. For the bigger things, like your relationship with yourself, your mom, your dad, I often suggest working one-to-one, because then you can go a lot deeper with those more complex relationships. So yeah, I like offer like public places where people can come, and but also work one to one.
Yes. And what's the name of your book so my audience can find them?
Yes, my book is called. I was just thinking I have a copy here. It's called Forgiveness Made Easy: The Revolutionary Guide to Moving Beyond Your Past and Truly Letting Go. It looks like that. And I love the picture. I actually asked the artist, I'd seen the picture, because it's like once you realize that a lot of the suffering is coming from underneath your own umbrella, if you can take charge of your umbrella, then you can look up into the light. And that kind of gives, for me, it gives hope that some of our suffering, obviously not all of our suffering, but some of it, we can do something about.
Yes. Thank you so much, Barbara, for sharing your book. I'm also in the realm of forgiveness, but mostly in the space of forgiving our body and forgiving the impact of the loss. Because in my space, I've experienced loss myself, and I've been really diving deep in forgiving myself for since the 5 years ago that I lost my two children that I never met. So forgiveness definitely was one of the reasons why I was able to heal myself, and so I appreciate you coming to the podcast show to explain the levels of forgiveness, the stages of forgiveness, and what they are, because I didn't know that even though it's so simple, just like you said, there are so many steps, and there is more to it than just the forgiving of yourself. There's also forgiving of many other things that surrounds your life. So I
Exactly.
appreciate you for coming to the show. And where can our listeners find you, and how can they connect with you?
They can connect via my website, which is forgivenessmadeeasy.co.uk, because I'm based in the UK. But I also have a YouTube channel, and sometimes I post little YouTube videos about forgiveness. And I'm also on Instagram. So if you look up Barbara J. Hunt, you'll find me and quite a lot of other Barbara J. Hunts. But if you put forgiveness in as well, you'll find me.
Yes. Thank you, Barbara. And I really love your work. So, and the book, it's going to be so monumental in someone's life, especially those that are just starting to learn how to forgive themselves, others, and everything else. So,
Yeah.
Barbara, any last words for our audience before we drop off?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Daisy May, for the opportunity to share with your audience. And I would say that forgiveness is it's there's like a resonance of forgiveness. It's like love or joy or any of those sort of high
Mm.
feelings or emotions. Forgiveness is very pure because it's so hard for us to do, because it really means going in the opposite direction rather than holding on. It means actually voluntarily letting go, which can be very difficult. But something happens when we forgive others or when we forgive ourselves. Something shifts in the interconnectedness between all of us. And I worked with somebody recently who had had a difficult relationship with their mother. They flew home and they said, "My mother hugged me, and she hasn't hugged me since I was 4 years old." And that's what shifts when you do your forgiveness work. Somehow something shifts in the world. And so my invitation to your listeners is that when you do your forgiveness work on yourself, on others, it adds to the forgiveness field to in the world. It means that it's like an amnesty for the whole of humanity. And if we want peace in our world, and oh my goodness, do we need more peace in the world? You can start in your own heart. You can say, okay, this place, this heart is going to be a place of peace.
Beautiful words, Barbara. As always, thank you so much. And to our listeners, I do hope and pray that you take to heart what Barbara has shared, because forgiveness really is a pure essence that can lead you to just understanding yourself, understanding others, and building that relationship, just like Barbara said, and it's not just individually, but collectively. So again, Barbara, thank you so much for your time, and I truly appreciate you being here. So again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Woman Collective podcast. I truly hope that you found this conversation meaningful and valuable. If you like what you heard today and if you would like to hear more, please go ahead and click the subscribe button below.